Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for tuning in on YouTube to our chat entitled The Many Faces of Diplomacy. I'm Emily Walker. I work at the US Embassy in Algiers. I work for the public affairs section. Part of my job is overseeing the various cultural centers that we have around the country of Algeria. One of those is the American Cultural Center Algiers, or ACCA, which is sponsoring today's talk. We also have cultural centers in Constantine, Oran, Bashar, and Ouargla. And our cultural centers are really cool places where Algerians can go to practice English, check out books, and hear interesting talks like the one you're about to hear today. So if you're located next to any of those cities, near any of those cities, I really encourage you to go and check out our offerings once the centers reopen. So we have a really interesting talk for you today, but before we get to the talk, I'd like to welcome United States Ambassador to Algeria, John DeRocher, who's going to deliver a few remarks. Ambassador?
Thanks, Emily. Thanks for the opportunity to join you today. It's really great to be here. The ACCA is really a great resource, as are our American corners around the country. They're really great cultural centers. They're really great for education, and they're really terrific for dialogue. I think it's great in the current circumstances that we can keep up the dialogue in this format. But as I think a lot of you know, I've really tried to travel around the country as much as I can, and I really hope the circumstances soon will change enough so that I can start doing that again. Well, we'll hope for the best, but that is something I would really like to get back to doing. And so I hope to be able to see a lot of you in person rather than over the video. I wanted to briefly join the discussion today. You know, this discussion has been planned for a couple of weeks, this discussion about the many faces of diplomacy. And with what's happened in the United States recently, I thought it was more important than ever that this discussion take place. And I wanted to join all of you just for a couple of minutes to talk about it. Obviously, you've all seen, you're all aware of the recent events in the United States. And of course, the death of George Floyd and the officers of the actions of the police officers in that incident are abhorrent and terrible, and anybody who has seen that video has to acknowledge that. Secretary Pompeo acknowledged exactly that. That a terrible incident is being investigated, and the officer concerned has been charged and will be tried for the actions that he took. And I just, given what's happened, I just wanted to note briefly to all of you that the outcry that you see in the United States today is about, of course, what happened to George Floyd, but it's also about injustices in the past. In the United States, we've always striven to become a more perfect union, to live up to the principles that our founders laid out 200 years ago. And I think the United States has made great strides to that end, but it is also clear that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And I think a lot of the reaction that you're seeing to this terrible incident is part of that dialogue to try to become a more just society. And I think the conversation that you're having with my colleagues today is a good opportunity to talk about race in America. And I'm really happy about the group that we have here today. I'm really proud of my colleagues at the embassy. They're drawn from all different parts of the United States, from all different backgrounds. They're all, I think, driven by a common desire to serve the United States and to make a contribution. And I think you will enjoy hearing from them about, how they see that role. And I want to thank Emily, and I want to thank everybody at the ACCA, and Salman and JB and Amr, who are going to be joining today. And of course, I want to thank all of you. I appreciate your taking the time to join us. I'm going to take myself off the screen, but I'm going to be listening into the YouTube feed. Thank you again for joining us. I'm looking forward to the conversation. And just let me finish up by saying, wear a mask. Everybody should be wearing a mask when you're out. So Emily, thank you. And I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I just want to add, we're not wearing masks right now because we're all in our home, but we do wear masks when we go out. So we have three panelists for our talk today. We have Amr Khan, who's a financial management officer, Salman Haji, who's an assistant cultural affairs officer, and Jean-Bernard Latortue, who's a professional associate in the political economics section. Going to kick it over to them, but I'm going to first introduce you briefly to our first speaker, Amr. I'm going to give you a little bit of his background, and then he's going to tell you his story. So Amr Khan, as I mentioned, is the financial management officer. He's been with the State Department for 8 years, and he served in a variety of capacities across the world. He's a naturalized Pakistani American born in Karachi. Prior to joining the State Department, he worked as an engineer and was an entrepreneur. He worked in high-tech companies in Silicon Valley and in the Boston area. He's fluent in Urdu, Hindi, Turkish, and speaks professional level Spanish. He's currently trying to learn French. Amr, if you could take it away and tell us a bit more detail about your background, where you were born and how you came to join the Foreign Service.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to everybody here. I wish you were doing it in person, just like the ambassador would give me a chance to meet all of you and maybe even circumstances permitting, shake your hand. And as Emily said, it's about diversity in the United States Foreign Service. I am fortunate to be one of the faces of American diplomacy. I'm also an engineer, a computer scientist, an entrepreneur. And luckily now for me, I'm an American diplomat. I was born in Karachi, Pakistan. My father was an officer in the Pakistan Air Force, and my mom was a school teacher. My first encounter with America, I guess, was actually in an American cultural center in Karachi, in Pakistan. It's this beautiful building in the heart of Karachi. It's a cultural landmark now. But this particular place, I think, was pivotal in my life and where I am now and what I did in life. To tell you the truth, the main reason I first went to this American Cultural Center was because it was the best air-conditioned place in the city. You know, it was really 40 degrees outside, centigrades, and I could go to this cold place and really nice and relax in it. But you never know how simple things can change your life, right? In my case, there were two very American things that made me or changed me or created me. One was this American Center, and I'll get to why. And the second one was that my dad bought me an Apple II computer when I was, I think, 12. I don't know if the audience know about this computer. It was well before the Mac came out. It was well before iPods and iPhones. It was the first commercially successful personal computer. And I was lucky enough to get one when I was in middle school. This computer opened my eyes to what computing could do and what software could do and could change the world. And it was all happening in a place called Silicon Valley. And today, you can download something from the net, you can go on YouTube and you can teach yourself anything you want. But back when I got this computer, there was no way for me to really figure it out unless I had books. And you could go to the American Cultural Center and buy, they could get you anything in the world. You could get a book on any computer, anything you wanted, and it would arrive within a week or two and you could have it. And this place became my place where I learned and borrowed books and learned how to program. And at 14, I could program. I was a good programmer at 14. And, I had one goal in mind, to go to Silicon Valley where this computer was made. And these two things, the American Center and the computer, were my path to America. And after high school, I tried to go to America, but it was expensive. I couldn't afford the college there. So I ended up in Turkey, where I became an electrical engineer. And during this time, my sights were still at America. I wanted to go to America. So the innovation, the ideas, the ability to do anything you want was really at the center of my desire to go. And I guess, I didn't think about America, as open to immigrants or anything, until I guess I heard this one speech by Ronald Reagan, President Ronald Reagan, about the city on a hill and on the hill. And it was about immigrants, and it gave me an idea of what it would be like, but it didn't really, but that it only told me that the door was open and I could get there. And the speech was nice, but I think my whole idea was I wanted to go to Silicon Valley and see it happen, right, where it's all made. After graduating as an electrical engineer, I finally managed to reach America. I got a teaching assistantship at Auburn, Alabama, in Auburn University. And the story about how I got there is another one, but it's a different way I can talk about it. But I think the two things I want to talk about being in America that I first encountered was in the college, the first time I dealt with the term collegiality, and sitting in an American classroom was very different from my previous classrooms. This is important because this really sort of shows how it is, what the difference is. The place was an open place. It was a place for discourse. You could disagree with the teacher. You could question anything you wanted. And for the first couple of weeks, I didn't really understand what was going on in this place. And then I realized this is how people learn. And it was so different from other classrooms where the teacher was always right and that there was a lecture. This classroom was very different. And this kind of gave me a glimpse of what America was like. The second thing that happened was maybe not as good. I was chosen to be working on this really cool project. It was the low Earth orbit satellite network that I was simulating. And a few weeks after I got into this thing, I was told I couldn't work on the project because I was Pakistani at the time, right? And there was some security implications that my background meant that I couldn't work on it. And I was extremely disappointed. And I felt, I guess, not all doors were open in America. Luckily, I had another project that they put me on, and I was able to get through grad school, and it was a very interesting project. But this was the first time I encountered a closed door in America. But again, after I finished my master's, I ended up going to Silicon Valley, going to work there, which was basically the culmination of my dream that I had in Karachi. And I worked on this company called Jenny. It was working on a problem called Jenny's Jam. Jenny's Jam was a service back in '97 where we could go and talk to each other online. We could post pictures, like each other's stuff, make friends. And yeah, you know what I mean? It was like a Facebook back in '98. And needless to say, that company failed. But it was my first experience with entrepreneurship, building something from scratch. And I got to do it well right at the beginning of the web, the internet era. And luckily, even though it was a failure, I saw Facebook succeed later. I managed to get into certain companies and launch certain companies where we ended up being acquired by IBM, which was well beyond what I'd ever imagined sitting in Karachi, that I dreamed of, but I maximally dreamed out. It didn't happen. It happened and well beyond. And it was an amazing ride. So that's how I guess I really found myself in America. But then, what am I doing here in U.S. Embassy in Algiers as a diplomat? Well, after I finished with IBM, I wanted to do something different, something else, and I was looking for something. 9/11 had happened, and we had, we were having trouble in various parts of the countries where I originated from. And I wanted to give back to the country which had given me everything, which had given me my dreams. So one day I read a speech by Robert Gates, former Secretary of Defense, and he said that if he could fully fund the Foreign Service, and he talked about having enough Foreign Service officers, and I wanted to know what that was. And I went to the State Department website, and I noticed that maybe I could apply and do this. And luckily, and I was fortunate enough to be selected to be a Foreign Service officer. This time, I actually got a security clearance. Everybody said that, that you will not get it. You're from Pakistan, right? But that didn't happen. And I am a Foreign Service officer. I got my security clearance, and I'm proud to serve here in Algiers and anywhere else in the world they make me. And I hope the story wasn't too long. I'm older, so I guess my story is long. Over to Emily. Thank you.
No, that's great. Could you just tell us quickly some other postings that you've been at before you?
All right. So I have worked in Turkey. That was during the Syrian civil war, back when it started and when it was really happening. I've worked in Adana, which is right by the border there of Syria. And then I've worked in Ankara, Turkey. I started my career out in Ecuador, in Guayaquil, in South America. And then my last tour before coming to Algiers, I was working in Mumbai, India, and now I'm here in Algiers.
Thank you so much. That was a very thorough backstory. You've done a lot of different things. I'm going to turn this over to Salman now. As I mentioned, Salman's the Assistant Cultural Affairs Officer in the Public Affairs section at the U.S. Embassy in Algiers. He was most recently on his first tour in Kingston, Jamaica. Prior to starting with the Department of State, he completed his graduate studies at American University and Koç University in Istanbul, Turkey. He speaks Arabic, French, Russian, and Turkish. And he's originally from, well, I'm not going to tell you where he's originally from because I'm going to let him do that in his talk. Salman?
Thank you so much, Emily, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about my experience. I'm very honored also to have the audience watching and hearing my story. As Emily said, I am originally from Tanzania, and it's a very interesting experience for me to talk about how I came from the corner of East Africa to all the way to the United States. I remember that life in Tanzania is completely different to anything that we could imagine happening in the US. And I grew up with a large family. My cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone lived on the same street. And my dad, he was a merchant on a ship. So he would sail most of the month. He would be gone on the ship, and he would come back and bring me, you know, new toys and stuff like this. I was very excited. And I never imagined that my life would take me to where I am today. When I was younger, my mom fell very ill. She had a lot of health complications. And around the time when I was 7, she was going into a really grave state. So my aunt, my dad's sister, was living in the United States at the time. She understood that the situation was getting worse and wanted to offer us to come to the United States finally, so that my mother could get her treatment and feel better. We went through the whole process of sponsoring, and we were eventually granted our visas. That was my first experience with the United States, was at a US embassy. And unfortunately, just before we were supposed to leave, my mother didn't make it. But I think of her every day because I think she's the reason why I'm here today. We ended up going to the United States anyway. Me, my brother, who was 7 years older than me, he was 14, I was 7, and my dad. The three of us got on a plane. We had never left East Africa before. And we went all the way to the other side of the world. And I remember that very moment of landing in Newark and thinking, oh, Newark, this is New York. This is the city of immigrants and Statue of Liberty. Obviously, it's not too far away, but yeah. And then we chose to settle in New Mexico, which is completely not known for immigrants coming from Africa or the Middle East, but a lot of immigrants live there coming from Mexico and Vietnam. So I felt like New Mexico was one of the best states that we could have lived in at the time because people there are so welcoming. Growing up in New Mexico for 10 years was what taught me what the US was like. People did not think of me differently. In fact, I think because of the way I look, I fit in very well. I think about half of the people living in New Mexico had Hispanic or Mexican origins, so I fit in very well. The only problem was that I didn't speak Spanish, so I had to learn Spanish and also learn soccer, football, because that's the pastime that we had as kids. It was very challenging to accustom to life in the United States. My dad came with very little support and very little money. He had never finished school, not even high school, and therefore finding a job for him was very difficult. Luckily, we had family to support us, and I wasn't distracted from my studies. My brother had to work part-time while going to school. He worked in fast food. My dad eventually got a job at a hospital, working as a tech, and we tried to make ends meet. For I think the first few years, the first 10 years in the United States were very difficult. I grew up living in a one-bedroom apartment with the two of my other family members. And I remember, the day that we got like an actual computer that wasn't like a gigantic screen, and we were able to afford getting a desk in our home, and being able to afford real food even. Most of my meals every day were paying $2 for a school lunch, and then coming home and making instant noodles. And then my dad would bring food from the hospital. Now I think, wow, like I can go and buy the fresh fruits and vegetables from an Algerian market and cook my own food, which is amazing. So after that time, I was able to study really hard and focus on my studies in New Mexico and get a scholarship to study in Minnesota. I got my bachelor's degree in Minnesota. It was a wonderful experience, and I really miss my colleagues there, my my classmates. And I found out about the Foreign Service because 9/11, September 11th was the time that defined my entry into the Foreign Service. All of a sudden, my identity as a Muslim was put into question. As a Muslim American, where do my allegiances stand? With everything that was going on in the US, the war in Iraq, in Afghanistan, I really questioned my identity as an American, as a Muslim, and I wanted to know how I could play a role in this. The times were difficult, but they led to a lot of opportunities. The US government had a lot of scholarships for us to learn Arabic, to learn Russian and Chinese and all these different languages. I think the US government at the time really understood that to connect to people, we had to learn their language and their way of life and culture. So I was lucky to get one of these scholarships and study in the Middle East. I learned Arabic and I lived with a host family in 3 different countries. And at the end of my time in college, I found out about this great opportunity to study, to enter the Foreign Service, the diplomatic corps for minorities. Because the Foreign Service is not traditionally known for being as diverse as the United States. They encouraged applicants who are minorities to apply, and the United States government would pay for their grad school, their graduate work, and then help us enter the Foreign Service that way. So I was lucky to apply and get selected. My first tour was Jamaica, and I was doing visas there. I was doing consular work, and that's when it hit me, is I was an immigrant to the United States, and I was on the other side of the visa window. I was the one being interviewed. My dad was, rather. And now I was doing that work. I was the consular officer representing the United States and choosing who gets to go to the United States as an immigrant, as a tourist, as a student. And that really meant a lot to me, that the most powerful country in the world would trust me with that final decision about a person. Now I've been in here in Algiers for 9 months. I've been very happy through it all. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Salman, for your backstory. Next up, we have Jean-Bernard Latortu, or JB as we call him. JB is a professional associate in the political economics section. He covers a range of issues affecting US-Algeria economic relations, such as trade barriers, information communication technology, and infrastructure. This is JB's first position with the US Department of State. He recently received a Master's of Art in International Affairs from George Washington University. JB, can I turn it over to you to tell us about your backstory, please?
Yeah, thank you, Emily, for this introduction, and thank you to all of you at home for joining us today. This is my first time talking to the American Cultural Center, so I'm really excited to be here to be talking to all of you. I hope at the end of this discussion with this great panel that we have today, you will be able to have a better sense of how diverse the American culture is and how diverse American people are. A little bit about myself. I was born in New York to Haitian parents, but I never actually get to live in New York because when I was 2 months old, my family moved back to Haiti, which is where I grew up until I was 18. So I actually completed elementary school, middle school, and most of my high school in Haiti. When I was 18, I moved to Miami, Florida, where I completed my last year of high school. After high school, I took a year off in between high school and college, not because I wanted to, but because I was still struggling to understand the American education system. I was quite frankly still learning English. So I took that year off to study for the SAT. The SAT, as some of you may know, if you're thinking about studying in the US, is a college entrance exam that most colleges and universities in the US do require so that they can help measure your preparedness to do college level work. So I studied very hard for the SAT. I had to take it 5 times. Remember when I told you that I was still learning English, so it took me a while and I had to take it and persevere. And with discipline, I finally got the score that I needed to get into St. Thomas University, where I completed my bachelor's degree in history and political science. And there's a little story I like to tell when I'm talking to young folks like yourself, is that St. Thomas University admitted me on a conditional basis because my SAT score was low. But 4 years later, when I graduated from that school, I was selected as the valedictorian. And the valedictorian is one of the highest honors that can be bestowed upon a student, because I studied hard. I had one of the highest GPA in undergrad and on my graduating class. And I participated in every single extracurricular activity you can think of. So on graduation, they selected me to give the valedictory speech, which was one of the greatest honors I've ever received. So after undergrad, I was selected for an internship with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation in Washington, DC, where they paid for my housing and they gave me a small stipend to cover expenses. So I interned for a member of Congress on Capitol Hill in Washington, DC. After that internship, I was offered my first full-time position with a lobby group in Washington, DC. A couple of years into that job, I decided to go to graduate school, and I applied for a Master's in International Affairs program at the George Washington University. I was admitted. I went there and I completed my studies, my master's there. There I met my wife, who was also studying international affairs, and she was in the same program that Salman talked about earlier, the Pickering program that is designed to attract minority students and minorities to enter the Foreign Service. So when we find out that my wife was coming to Algeria, I decided to apply for position with the US Department of State as well. And I was, right before I came here, I was offered the position in the political economic section at the US Embassy here. And I've been here since 2018 and representing my country, which is one of the greatest honor that I can actually have. So, and that, I think I've talked a lot, so that's all I have to say. We can now go to the questions.
Thank you very much. And I didn't mention it on here yet, but you can ask your questions in YouTube. We already have questions coming in. You can ask them in the chat function, and then we will ask the diplomats your question. First question, we have 2 people ask this. Both, let's see, Amin asked this question. He's curious what kind of studies you need to do to become a diplomat. And then sort of if you can also address in the same one, others are asking if you could ever become ambassador. Tufik wants to know if it's possible to work your way up to become ambassador. So what do you have to study to be a diplomat, and could you become ambassador? Who wants to take that? Don't all jump in at once.
I can take it.
Thanks, Amar.
So I didn't study anything in terms of diplomatic studies or political science or international relations to become a diplomat. I'm an engineer, software engineer. I'm an electrical engineer. To enter the Foreign Service, that was interesting. When I was looking at it, I was applying just from out of the blue. I saw the website. I said, I'm going to apply for it. the testing and the requirements are, there's no requirement. There is simply some base requirements that if you have a bachelor's degree, you get preference and so on, but there's no specific requirement. I think the American Foreign Service, which is what's unique about it, is that you can be from any background. You have teachers, lawyers, bankers, political scientists, any number of different variations you can think of who can become, join the Foreign Service in the United States. The answer to the first question in terms of what you specifically need to study, the answer is, well, you have to be good at what you study, but you don't have to study anything in specific. The actual test is the kind of test which you can't pass if you don't, the test is about anything. They'll ask you about math, they'll ask you about geography, history, American labor law, anything. Meaning the testing again is so diverse that if you have to study for that test, you probably won't pass it, right? So you either have worldly knowledge and you're interested in things and you're curious, then you can enter. The oral testing, which is the final stage of the testing, is more about how you deal with pressure, how articulate are you collaborative, and a variety of things, and can you write? And those are all things that everybody's supposed to know. Now, of course, there are a lot of details that can go into the cones and the different ways that you can join. I mean, there are a variety of things, but in reality, my entry was done based on not really needing to study anything specific, but being able to know and understand and think and talk about most things in life. And that's it. As far as being ambassador, yes, if you are a Foreign Service officer, tenured, and you are able to become ambassador, but it takes a while. And it takes the Senate of the United States to nominate you, right? So yes, you can become ambassador.
I wanted to follow up on that second point. I could never be ambassador. I don't want to be. I think it's too stressful. I don't know how ambassadors deal with the everyday, day-to-day, but I wanted to bring up the point that you can be anything you want in the Foreign Service. It doesn't matter what you are. What matters is how hard you work, and ultimately that's what brings you. Like in many professions in the United States, it's the hard work that matters. To give you an example, just in our embassy here, our financial management officer, who controls all the money, is Pakistani American, Amir. He's right here. Our visas chief, our consul is Marwa. She's an Egyptian American. Our deputy chief of mission is an Indian American. So when I see that we have these people who are in charge of huge operations in the embassy, and they're trusted by the United States government, and they come from diverse backgrounds, just like I do, that gives me the positivity that what I can do, I can be anything I want in the Foreign Service.
Emily, you're on mute.
No, I'm good. Thank you. Thanks. This is a follow-on for Amr. This is from Gomri Tej, who wrote this on YouTube. Does being a U.S. diplomat prevent you from being an ambassador of Pakistan?
So I personally renounced my Pakistani citizenship, and I was not required to renounce my citizenship to Pakistan to become a U.S. diplomat, right? Now, of course, when you join the Foreign Service, you're making a decision, and you're making a decision that has to have clarity for both for yourself personally, your allegiance, and I did renounce the Pakistani citizenship. So yes, for me, it's impossible to become a diplomat in Pakistan. Now, certainly, in general, the reason why also I renounced the Pakistani citizenship was for me to be able to go as a U.S. diplomat to Pakistan. If I go to Pakistan and I also have a Pakistani citizenship, then I do not get the immunities, diplomatic immunities, to go to Pakistan. Now, in general, the answer to that question is yes. It precludes you from doing service for another country, because again, that'll mean you have conflicts of interest. And I think to take this job and do it right, you have to have clarity of your allegiances. And yes, as a Foreign Service officer in the United States Foreign Service, I am not going to join and represent any other country, and you're not allowed to, of course. Yes.
Thank you very much for that. The next question we have from YouTube from Leticia. what is the hardest language you've had to learn? You're all multilingual, so I'm sure you can have some good answers for this one.
I can take that one. As I was explaining earlier when I started talking about my story, I'm a person who actually never get to study on my native language. Yes, I was born in the US, but I grew up in Haiti. So therefore my native language is Haitian Creole. But in Haiti, the language of instruction is in French. So I had to study in French. When I moved to the US, to the country where I was born, I had to study in English. And so I never got to operate under my native language, but and to say that French and English, I had to learn all of them, but none of them, I think, compared to how hard Arabic is. And I'm taking Arabic right now at the embassy. I've been taking it for 2 years. I like to practice with people. So if people want to practice with me, that's great. But I think Arabic is one of the hardest language you can learn. However, as in this life as a foreign service officer and as a diplomat, being able to learn a language, being able to adapt to different cultures is one of the skill set you must have. And so we tend to do it better than most Americans. And that's one of the qualities as a foreign service officer.
I would say I've learned Arabic, Russian, French, some Spanish, Turkish, Persian, Tajik. Arabic is the most difficult language I've ever had to learn. I've studied it for maybe like 10 years now, on and off, and in 4 different countries. It's the most difficult language. It's the language that I pray in, but this does not get any easier. The more you learn, the more you find out that there's more to Arabic than you thought. And especially Algerian Darja is something that I struggle with on a daily basis. I love it. I love Darja. I want to speak it and learn it and become fluent, but it's a struggle.
Well, for me, it was Turkish. I learned Turkish when I was 17, and at 17, you're really good at languages because your brain's still sort of real fresh. But the reason why it was so difficult, and Turkish is not a difficult language, but it was really hard for me to learn Turkish because of my roommates in college. They would speak a dialect of Turkish, which basically used bad words for normal words. And I learned all this garbage, because for the first 7 months I was their roommate. I would learn this stuff. It was all cuss words, and I would have to speak those. And I would go out in public and speak those, and people would get really mad at me. and as I was learning Turkish, I realized much later that these guys were teaching me something else. And not until I got my first girlfriend in Turkey that she told me that what I was doing. And then I stopped learning Turkish for many months because I was scared if I was going to say something bad out in public. So yes, Turkish was very hard for the first year of my time in Turkey. And I didn't speak a word of Turkish. I arrived in Turkey and I had to do electrical engineering there. I mean, it was mostly in English, but living in Turkey at that time without any English, without any Turkish was tough. And I remember really struggling for the first year. Nearly got beaten up a couple of times because I said something and I didn't know it was not really good Turkish. So yes, Turkish was terrible. It was hard.
Now, were your roommates deliberately telling you bad words so you'd embarrass yourself?
Yeah, they would talk to each other. And they would use a bad word for a simple thing like a comb, or they would say good morning and they would say something really bad. And they would just speak like that all day long. And I had no idea the difference in the good words, from the good words to the bad words. And I just stumbled and struggled every day. And these guys would have so much fun with it. And I so for the first year, I didn't learn anything. And I stopped learning, in fact, deliberately.
That's pretty funny, but I could see how that would get you in big trouble. Okay, next question we have is from Tufik. And he wants to know if diplomats are allowed to run a business as long as it's not in the country that you're posted in. So could you all be a diplomat and then also like a businessman and have a company in the US or some other country?
there are laws that prevent us from being, there's got to be disclosure. First of all, yes, within this country, I cannot have a business holding. I cannot have investments even. In fact, if I have significant investments or inheritance even, then I potentially have, there's leverage within this country against me. But overall, there are laws for federal employees regarding having businesses or being directors in businesses or having operational control of a business if you are a federal employee. Certain things, like for example, me, I'm a financial management officer, so I have a lot of fiscal authority in the State Department, and that results in disclosures that I have to make every year. And all people who deal with a lot of money in the State Department have to deal with disclosures of what I have interests in, which stock market, where in the stock market I'm invested, so that I am not able to misuse my authority in any way. And then there are restrictions on what trade I can, in stock market trading and so on. However, there is no law against me being a director on a company. But then, for example, if I'm hiring somebody or I'm deciding a contracting negotiation, there are a variety of restrictions around that. But there are, again, you're allowed to do it, but there's a gazillion constraints that you have to manage. In general, I would say it would be very hard for somebody to actually own that level of business interest in a given company and be a US diplomat, especially if you're working in the sort of work I do.
Okay, so legal, but very complicated. Thank you for that answer. This is a request we have from Siham. She would like it if you could each say a sentence in Arabic. And it doesn't need to be anything complicated, because I know, JB, you're just learning it. So maybe just a quick sentence introducing yourself even, or anything you want to say in Arabic real quick. Amr, could we start with you since you're...
First of all, I'm sorry, I have not been learning Arabic. I've been learning French. But
do something for us in Turkish.
Shukran. I don't have a sentence, unfortunately. Sorry, I've not really put in time in it. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, sorry to put you on the spot. You're welcome to say a sentence in Turkish if you'd like.
Çok memnun oldum sizler ile. Umarım ki yine konuşacağız. That's it.
Thank you very much. JB, a quick sentence in Arabic?
I don't know if it's a sentence, but I know how to say nice to meet you. So that would be tasharafna, and I can say kaifa al.
Saha, Salman, a quick sentence, please.
حبيت نقول لكم الجزائريين نحبكم بزاف. راني نفكر في 9 شهور اللي راني هنا ونشتاق للجزائر ديجا، باسكو انا مشتاق، انا نعشق بزاف هذا البلد والجزائريين في قلبي دائما. صحة.
Thank you, Salman. You're a model for all of us trying to learn language. I thought that was quite impressive. So I'd like to ask you guys, I'd be remiss if we're doing a panel that's kind of celebrating diversity in the Foreign Service without asking for your thoughts on the situation in the United States. By that, I mean the killing of George Floyd and the ongoing protests that are happening in many cities throughout the US, and general racial tension that is coming to a head right now in America. So just for anyone who wants to comment on that, so say a couple words on that, I would appreciate your thoughts.
I can start. Well, the killing of George Floyd and the hand of police officers in Minneapolis is without a doubt a horrific event that has reopened all the racial wounds that have haunted America for the past 200 plus years. Despite significant progress we've made as a nation on race relations, the fact is racism still exists in some ways in the US. Many of us in the Black, Brown, and other marginalized community can probably point to a point when we felt that we were racially profiled. Any of us on this panel can point to a moment that we thought we were experiencing it. So there is no sugarcoating that racism exists in the US just because we're talking to you as representative of our country. As American, as a nation, I believe we should do better. We should continue to strive for the ideals that we hold dear. We should continue to strive for certain beliefs that we hold about certain inalienable rights of freedom, equality, and justice for all. But I would be remiss if I were not to mention that despite all of what's going on, despite the racism we know that exists in some corners in the US, America is still one of the most exceptional countries. My mother understood that. That's why some 30 years ago, she decided to move to the US so that I could be an American. And I believe she was right, because look at it right now. I am talking to you as a first generation American, representing my country, living the American dream. So that's all I could say on this.
Thanks, JB. Amr or Salman, do either of you want to chime in?
Yeah, I'll take a attempt at it. So first of all, yes, these are horrific events. We are all in many ways ashamed, many ways just disappointed and just disheartened by what happened. But I'll say this, that the United States is not perfect, right? Far from it. I came to America, became American, not because it was some sort of utopia, but because the United States has the ability to always get better. I believe the United States is a set of aspirations enshrined in our Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The path towards these aspirations is difficult. We have continually fought within our country to criticize ourselves and thus improve ourselves. We continue to believe in equality under the law, the right to free speech, justice, and much, much more. We do not always implement these aspirations correctly, like what happened in Minneapolis. Our aspirations and ideals, however, remain true, and our desire to continue towards these aspirations remains true. The road is for a more perfect union is painful, difficult, but it remains open, right? I have lived in Alabama. That was my first real encounter with the United States. I've seen racism. I've been called names, and I've also been helped by people around me and to stand up to this, right? And there have been people I have no idea, I don't know them, but I've seen both sides, and I can see which side is going to win. The right is going to win. The recent events in Minneapolis make me angry, and I feel let down by this, but the ideals, it smears our ideals, but the ideals themselves, right? They're pure and they're real and they exist and they'll continue, right? The central theme I've observed in that country, is that our system is designed to continually criticize itself. It finds its own faults and then highlight for the world to see, highlight them, right? We publish them and then make attempts to fix these faults. It is very hard for our imperfections to be hidden behind a communist firewall or a military junta's control or to the threat of persecution, right? Sooner or later, it all comes out and the United States goes through a series of painful changes. Some of these are severe experiences like the one we are going through right now. And the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement were just similar such junctures, right? And the result in each case was that America came out better. I'm optimistic, if nothing else, we will come out of this crisis better. George Floyd, he would not have died in vain. The framers of our Constitution understood that. The First Amendment, freedom of expression and the right to assembly in a democracy is directly connected to our ability to improve. The aforementioned rights are being used right now. They're not curtailed. In fact, to an extreme maybe, as anger spills over into our streets. We'll come out stronger. And we will fix this. And yes, we will probably continue to argue over what is a good fix. Finally, as I said, the United States is not perfect. I also contend that we will never be perfect. Because the day you become perfect, you cannot improve anymore. We will always look to get better than we are. And yes, we have some ways to go. Absolutely, we have a long ways to go. Thank you.
I'd like to just echo on what my two colleagues here said. I think it rings true that all of us have faced some kind of injustice in the past, and racism and discrimination is for many Americans is a daily occurrence that happens. It's important to remember too that this isn't an American phenomenon, it's a global phenomenon. Every society faces racism and discrimination. And as these societies, we have to work together to dispel myths, to work together to form cohesion and the bonds that would overcome that. I think it's important to remember too that America is a work in progress. As my colleague said, we have our own issues. We're working on them, and we grow from them and we learn from them. So I've always felt like an integral part of this embassy, because there are conversations around this topic, because I've been asked what I think about this topic, and I've been included and felt included in these conversations.
Thank you guys so much for addressing that. We have another question that is from Amin on YouTube. And Amin asks, are US diplomats entitled to have political views that go against their administration? Two tough questions in a row here. If anybody wants to take a stab at this one.
You're entitled to your views, of course. There's no, but we are implementing what the administration is the policies of this administration, or whatever administration we work for, and that is a requirement. And if I have a significant enough opinion or view that I cannot implement a policy or a view of the administration that I'm working for at the point in time, I can resign, right? You can do that, and so you can have a view. You can sort of request to be removed from the position that you might have to implement a policy you don't want, right? However, at the end of the day, you can have the views you want when you're at post, when you're in a country that you are working at. You are not allowed to, you're not going to express those views publicly or within the country if they countermand or undermine a policy or a position of the United States at the given time. And yes, that's how it should be, because no organization can work properly if the people working in that organization are not pulling in the same direction. And yes, if you disagree with something that the particular organization does, you can internally advise against it. There are mechanisms in place inside the State Department where you can advise against it, but you can't undermine it or not implement the policy you're asked to do. There's a thing called a dissent channel, which is a mechanism to report back to Washington on a dissent. That means you disagree with a given policy in a given place, right? And that mechanism is in place. There are mechanisms to get the message back to correct policy, but the policy is the policy, and as long as that policy stays in place, your job is to implement it.
Thank you for that, Amr. Salman or JB, do you want to add anything to that? Okay, a few people on YouTube have asked to hear your perceptions of Algeria. So I wonder if we could just go around and you could say sort of how you found Algeria when you moved here, and some thoughts you have now that you've lived here for a
while. I could go first. My perceptions about Algeria, and I've been here for almost 2 years now. The Algerian people are super nice. And I can point to many examples. For example, when I go to a supermarket to buy something, if I do not have enough change to pay for it, the cashier would say, oh, don't worry, you will pay me back later. Even if the person doesn't know me or doesn't know if I'm coming back, but just want to be nice and say, oh, I understand if you do not have enough money to pay for this, and so forth. If I'm trying to struggle parking my car in the street because the street may be so narrow, you would always find a lot of people trying to help you. So my impression of Algeria is that they are very nice. I love the beautiful country here. I've been to Gigel, I've been to some other places. I've seen the beauty of this place. I love it. I love the culture and the weather as well. So my 2 years impression here has been very, very positive.
I I love this place. I don't know. Algeria is such a unique place, and the experiences that I've had here only in the first half of my tour here are going to stay with me for the rest of my life. Just walking around the neighborhood, I meet people in my community that I can connect with just like that. The police officers the other day that are around the corner, they asked me, "Wash ya kho, mazal fil Jazair, alash ma rahtush al American?" So they were asking, "Why are you still here? All the Americans have left." And I told them, "No, I love this place. I mean, you know, I'm concerned about my family in the U.S., of course, but my life is here, and I'm happy to be here." Just that kind of concern from the people here, checking in on you during Ramadan. I've gotten all these calls and messages, and people checking in on me. It feels like I've made a lot of great friends and even family here. And I really want to do a big shout out to our Algerian local staff, because the local staff at the embassy are the people that I see every day and work with every day, and they make my life amazing here. They have helped me. They've taught me so much about the culture and the language here, and I owe it to them that I'm so happy here.
So I guess I've been here the shortest amount of time, and unfortunately about 2.5 months of it has been in lockdown. So I have 5 months here, maybe 2.5 months of actual really seeing the place and moving out and going around town. And the first impression I got, it's an absolutely beautiful place. You know, it reminds me of Southern California. You know, it's the weather, the way it looks, and the terrain. It's just gorgeous. You know, it's one of those very beautiful places that I haven't been to a whole bunch of this country. This country is huge. So, I mean, by just looking at Algiers, you know, the way it looks, the way the hills, it's lovely. The big thing I'll say that the people, you know, I feel like they're extremely warm in the streets and all. Unfortunately, my lack of French and my lack of Arabic, this is the first place I've ever been to where I didn't really speak the language at a native level, right? And unlike, you know, India and Turkey and all, and that's really holding me back, I feel, to get to know the place. To get to know the place, you have to really get to know the people. And the people I got to know well are my staff, the people who work for me at the embassy and work around me. And I think I can say one thing, and this is after having worked in many places and worked with outside and inside the State Department. The quality of my staff in this financial management staff that I have here in Algiers is exceptional. And these guys are probably the best local staff I've had anywhere. Their work ethic, their skill set, their depth of knowledge, their ability to sort of think through problems and not need, you know, that is just amazing. To me, at times, you know, and now maybe I'll make a critique a little bit, but I'll say this, that Algeria, given the quality of the people and the staff that I've seen, and especially I've been sitting in interviews and hiring people here too, a few times, and the quality of the candidates that come in, how educated they are, how well they speak, I feel that Algeria is batting well below its weight. You know, it could do so much better given the quality of the human resource here, right? For my little glimpse of it, you know, hiring quality people and finding quality people to work is an incredible challenge anywhere in the world. And I find that Algeria's got an incredible quality of people, and just from a professional point of view, I feel like that's the biggest compliment I can give Algeria. And I think that should lead to success, right? Success in industry and everything. And I feel like, given what, you know, unfortunately, I think that this is not happening here. And I don't know the reason why. Don't have enough information about it, but I just think it's amazing. The country's got a lot of potential.
Okay, well, it's 5 o'clock, so we're going to wrap this up. But thank you, Amr, Salman, JB. Thank you for your participation, for your candor. And thank you for everyone who's watching this on YouTube. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And this talk will be saved, so you can watch it at a later date on our YouTube channel. And we hope to see you all at the ACCA or one of the other cultural centers around Algiers once they reopen. Thank you so much.